You've probably had this moment before. You're in a room where nothing is wrong. People are friendly. The conversation is light. You're participating. You're smiling at the right times. From the outside, everything looks normal. And yet, somewhere underneath that surface calm, there's a quiet awareness that you don't fully belong to what's happening. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way you could point to or explain. Just a subtle feeling that you're slightly out of sync with the room. It's the kind of feeling that shows up afterward, not during. When you replay the interaction in your head and wonder why it took more energy than it seemed to take for everyone else. Or why you feel relieved the moment you're alone again, even though nothing unpleasant actually occurred. You might have tried to name this feeling before. Maybe you called it being too sensitive, or overthinking, or just assumed you were bad at fitting in. But none of those explanations ever felt quite right, because the truth is, you don't feel broken. You just feel different. And no one ever taught you a language for that. And maybe the real question isn't why you feel out of place, but why we assume that feeling at ease is the default state for everyone. When you feel different without knowing why, the world tends to offer simple explanations. You're shy, you're introverted, you're anxious, you're overthinking. You just need to open up more. None of these labels are meant to hurt you. Most of the time, they're offered casually, even kindly, as if the discomfort you feel can be neatly folded into a familiar box. But what those explanations miss is something important. They focus on how you appear, not how you experience. From the outside, you may seem perfectly capable. You can talk to people. You understand social rules. You know how to function. There's no obvious struggle. And because there's no visible problem, the quiet sense of being out of place gets treated as a personality quirk rather than a meaningful signal. So you learn to doubt it. You tell yourself, if everything is fine, why do I feel this way? You assume that if you can't explain the difference, it must not be real. But feeling different doesn't always mean feeling unhappy. Sometimes it means your inner world is operating on a different frequency than the environments you're often placed in. And when there's no language for that mismatch, it gets misread as fragility or social deficiency. What rarely gets considered is that this sense of difference may not be a flaw at all. It may be a form of internal attunement, a nervous system that notices subtleties others move past, or a mind that processes experience more deeply than it shows on the surface. And when that kind of inner life grows up in spaces that don't reflect it back, the result isn't dramatic alienation. It's something quieter. A lifelong feeling of being slightly misaligned, even when everything looks fine. That difference isn't loud enough to demand attention, but it's consistent enough to shape how you move through the world. One reason this feeling is so hard to explain is that it doesn't come from a single event or trait. It comes from how your mind learned to organize experience over time. Some brains are built to scan for nuance. They don't just register what's happening, they register how it's happening. Tone shifts, emotional undercurrents, unspoken expectations. Your mind takes in more data than you consciously ask it to. And while that can look like thoughtfulness or sensitivity on the outside, internally, it means your system is almost always processing on multiple layers at once. Imagine your brain as a room with the lights turned slightly brighter than average. Nothing is wrong with the room, but the brightness makes you aware of dust in the air that others don't notice. You see more, hear more, and feel more. Not dramatically, just consistently. Over time, this creates a subtle gap between you and your surroundings. Not because you don't understand people, but because you understand too much at once. Your nervous system is constantly integrating information that doesn't get acknowledged out loud. And when your inner processing doesn't match the simplicity of the external moment, you feel out of place without knowing why. There's also a timing difference. Many people move through life by reacting quickly and adjusting later. Your mind may do the opposite. It pauses, evaluates, cross-checks, and reflects before fully engaging. To others, this looks like calm or reserve. Inside, it's active, complex, and quietly intense. This isn't anxiety in the clinical sense. It's not dysfunction. It's a system oriented toward depth and coherence rather than speed. But in fast-moving social environments that reward immediacy and surface-level ease, that orientation can feel like a mismatch. Your brain, in its own way, is trying to protect clarity. It wants things to make sense internally before it fully settles. And when the world doesn't slow down enough for that to happen, you don't panic. You adapt. You participate. You function. You just never fully arrive. That lingering sense of difference isn't a failure to belong. It's the residue of a mind that processes life from the inside out, in environments that mostly move from the outside in. At some point, it's worth pausing and asking a quieter, more difficult question. Is this sense of difference simply who you are, or is it partly how you learn to stay safe? For some people, depth comes naturally. For others, it develops early. When your environment doesn't fully mirror your inner world, you adapt by turning inward. You become observant. You listen more than you speak. You learn to read rooms before entering them emotionally. Not because you're afraid, but because that's how coherence is maintained. This is where the line between preference and protection begins to blur. You may genuinely enjoy reflection, solitude, and internal clarity. And at the same time, those qualities may have been strengthened by moments when being fully expressive didn't feel useful, welcome, or understood. The mind remembers what worked. If staying inward reduced friction, confusion, or emotional noise, it quietly made that strategy permanent. The uncomfortable part isn't that this happened. It's that the adaptation can become so seamless, you forget it was an adaptation. You start to experience distance as identity, difference as inevitability. And so you stop questioning it. You stop wondering whether the world feels misaligned because you're meant to stay slightly apart, or because your system learned that being fully present required too much translation. This isn't about blaming the past or pathologizing your personality. It's about noticing how intelligence and self-protection can quietly overlap. How a thoughtful nervous system can choose distance not out of fear, but out of efficiency. And yet, even efficient strategies have a cost. The cost is subtle. It's the quiet sense that no matter how well things go, you're always holding something back. Not consciously, but structurally. Not because you don't want connection, but because your system was shaped to remain just a step removed. Understanding this doesn't mean you need to change, but it does invite a deeper honesty about how this difference came to live inside you. The goal was never to eliminate the feeling of being different. That difference is real, and in many ways it reflects a mind that values depth, coherence, and inner alignment more than easy belonging. What matters is understanding why it's there. When you finally have language for this experience, something softens. You stop trying to force yourself into explanations that never fit. You stop assuming that comfort should come automatically just because nothing is wrong. And instead, you begin to recognize that your nervous system has its own logic, one shaped by awareness, subtlety, and a long habit of paying attention. This doesn't mean your distance is a flaw. And it doesn't mean it has to define you completely.
It simply means that your way of engaging with the world has been carefully constructed over time. Some of it is preference. Some of it is protection. Both deserve respect. Neither needs to be rushed or corrected. Clarity doesn't arrive as a sudden breakthrough. It arrives as permission. Permission to stop self-interrogating every quiet discomfort. Permission to trust that feeling different doesn't automatically mean being disconnected. And permission to let your inner world exist without needing constant translation. You don't need to become more obvious. You don't need to simplify yourself for ease. You only need to understand the structure you've been living inside. And when you do, the feeling of being slightly out of place loses its sharpness.
It becomes information rather than identity, a signal, not a verdict.
That understanding is often the first moment you stop asking what's wrong with you and start recognizing what's been quietly right all along.